Because, you know, when I think about criticizing anybody for anything now, yeah, and sometimes there are times when I do have to criticize people. Sometimes I have to criticize the people I'm working with. Some of them, not all of them. But always inside of me, maybe they don't hear it, but inside of me, when I find it necessary for me to express disapproval of anything anybody does, I always say inside of me, well, God pity us all. And but for the grace of God, I'd be the man that I'm over there criticizing. And maybe I've done things that 10 times as bad as the thing I'm criticizing him for. In other words, I try to maintain that sense of humility in my heart, regardless of what happens to me that's unpleasant, and regardless of how the more successful I become, the more I observe this feeling of humility of the heart, recognizing that after all, whatever success I have is due entirely to the friendly, marvelous love and affection and cooperation of other people. Because without that, I could never have spread myself over the world the way I have. I could never have benefited the people that I have. I could never have grown the way I have grown had it not been for the love and the affection and the marvelous, friendly cooperation of other people. And I couldn't have gotten that cooperation if I hadn't adjusted myself to other people in a state of friendliness. Last but not least, personal magnetism. That has reference to the sex emotion, of course. An inborn trait, and the only one of the traits of personality which cannot be cultivated, but it can be controlled and directed to beneficial usages. As a matter of fact, the most outstanding leaders, salesmen, speakers, clergymen, lawyers, lecturers, teachers, most outstanding in every field of endeavor, as a matter of fact, are people who have learned to transmute sex emotion. That is to say, convert that great creative energy over into doing the thing that you want to do most at the time being. And that word transmute is something to conjure with, something to look up in the dictionary until you make sure you understand what it means. Now, you've got a lot of thinking to do about this, and you're going to make discoveries about yourself. You're going to find out that when you really come down to answering these questions and giving yourself a rating, that you have certain weaknesses that you didn't know you had, and that you have certain strengths and certain good qualities that you perhaps had undervalued. Let's find out about ourselves to see just where we stand, what it is that makes us tick, why people like us, why people dislike us. And I could take any one of you and sit down with you, and by asking you, I'll say not over 20 questions, I could lay my finger right on what's keeping you from being popular if you are not popular. And you can do the same thing. That's what I want you to do. I want you to learn to analyze people, starting with yourself, find out what it is that makes people popular, what it makes them tick. And when you do that, you have one of the greatest assets that you could possibly imagine. Thank you very much. Well, the first half of the evening is devoted to going the extra mile. And of course, as you know, that means the rendering of more service and better service than you're paid to render, doing it all the time, and doing it in a pleasant, pleasing mental attitude. Now, one of the reasons why there are so many failures in the world today is that the majority of people do not even go the first mile, let alone the second one. And oftentimes, if they do go the first mile, they gripe as they go along and make themselves a darn nuisance. People around them. I said darn nuisance. I suppose you know the type. Of course, that doesn't apply to any of you, because if you were like that before you got into this philosophy, you're going to get over it very fast. I don't know of any one quality or trait that can get a person an opportunity quicker than to go out of his way or her way to do somebody a favor, do something useful. It's the one thing that you can do in life that you don't have to ask anybody's privilege of doing it. As a matter of fact, if you're going to be free and independent and self-determining and financially independent in old age, you might just as well make up your mind that you can never be that unless by a stroke of good luck, a rich uncle or a rich aunt dying or something of that sort, unless you form the habit of going the extra mile and make yourself as near indispensable as you possibly can. I don't know of any way that anybody can make himself or herself indispensable except by going the extra mile, by rendering some sort of service that you're not expected to render, and rendering it in the right sort of a mental attitude. Now, that mental attitude is important. If you gripe about going the extra mile, the chances are that it won't won't bring you very many returns. Now, where do I get my authority, do you suppose, for emphasizing this principle of going the extra mile? What causes me to emphasize that?
Experience.
I get it by looking around and watching the way nature does things. And any time that you can follow the habits of nature, you're not going to go wrong. And stated conversely, any time that you fail to recognize the way nature does things and do not go along, you are going to get into trouble sooner or later. Just a question of time. Because there is an overall plan through which this universe operates, and no matter what you call the first cause of that plan, or the operator of it, or the creator of it, no matter what you call that, there's just one plan, there's just one set of natural laws, and it's up to every individual to discover what those natural laws are and adjust himself favorably to them. And certainly, if there is one thing that stands out above all others in nature, it is that nature requests and demands that every living thing go the extra mile in order to eat, in order to live, in order to survive. Man wouldn't survive one season if it were not for this law of going the extra mile. Don't render service, $1 million worth of service a day, and then expect to go and get a check for it tomorrow. In other words, if you start out to render $1 million worth of service, you perhaps have to render a little bit at a time, and you'll have to get yourself recognized. And while you're going through that period of recognition, the chances are that you'll not be compensated for going the extra mile. Chances are you'll have to go the extra mile quite a little while before anybody takes notice of you. But always be careful that you don't go the extra mile too long without somebody taking notice of you. And if the right fellow doesn't take notice, look around until you find the right fellow who will. That's about the equivalent of saying if your present employer doesn't recognize you, if you work for an employer, why, fire the employer sooner or later and let his competitor know what kind of service you're rendering. Won't hurt your chances a bit. I'll assure you it won't. Have a little competition as you go along. Now, nobody ever accepts a rule or does anything without a motive, and I have outlined here in this lesson a great variety of reasons why you should go the extra mile. I'm going to make comments on them. Now, what do I mean by the law of increasing returns? Benefits, yes. Well, substantially, the law of increasing returns means that you'll get back more than you give out, whether it's good or whether it's bad, whether it's positive or whether it's negative. And that's the way the law of nature works. Whatever you give out, whatever you do to or for another person, or whatever you give out from yourself comes back to you, greatly multiplied in kind. No exception to that whatsoever. Again, there is the question of timing. The coming back process doesn't always come back very quickly. Sometimes it's longer than you expect. But you may be sure that if you send out some negative influence, that it's going to come back on you sooner or later, and you may not recognize what caused it, but it'll come back. It won't overlook you. That law of increasing returns is eternal. It's automatic. It's working all the time. And it's just as inexorable as the law of gravitation. There's nobody in the world that can circumvent it or go around it or have it suspended for one moment. It's operating all the time. The law of increasing returns means that when you go out of your way to render more service and better service than you paid to render, it's impossible for you not to get back more than you really did, because eventually that law of increasing returns takes care of that. If you're working for a salary, for instance, it takes care of it in additional wages, in greater responsibilities, in promotions, in opportunities that will come to you to go into business for yourself. In 1,001 different ways it'll come back. And oftentimes this coming back process doesn't come back from the source to which you render the service. Don't be too afraid to render service to a greedy buyer or to a greedy employer. It makes no difference to whom you render this service. If you render it in good faith and in good spirit and keep on doing it as a matter of habit, it's just as impossible for you not to be compensated as it is to be and not to be at the same time. Well, that law of increasing returns. Now, just remember that when you start applying this principle, that you don't have to be too careful about the person whom you render it. As a matter of fact, what you should really do is to apply this principle with everybody you come into contact, no matter who it is. Strangers and acquaintances and business associates and relatives alike. Make it your business to render useful service wherever you touch human relations in any shape, form, or fashion. Because the only way that you can increase the space that you occupy in the world, and by the space that you occupy, I don't mean necessarily the physical space, but the mental and spiritual space as well, will be determined by the quality and the quantity of the service that you render. The quality and the quantity plus the mental attitude in which you render it. Now, those are the determining factors as to how far you'll go in life, how much you'll get out of life, how much you'll enjoy life, and how much peace of mind you'll have. And next, it brings one to the favorable attention of those who can and often do provide opportunities for self-promotion. The favorable attention of people. You'll go into any organization, and if you're alert-minded and take notice, you'll find out who the people are that are going the extra mile. You'll find out very quickly. And also, if you watch the procedure and the records of those people who are going the extra mile, you'll find that when there are promotions around, they're the ones that get the promotions. They don't have to ask for them. It's not necessary at all. Because the employers are just naturally looking around for people who will go the extra mile. And next, it tends to permit one to become indispensable in many different human relationships, and therefore enables one to command more than the average compensation. But I'll tell you one thing that's not in my notes that it does, and I want you to know this. It does something to your soul inside of you. It makes you feel better. And if it didn't do if there's not another reason in the world why you should go the extra mile, I'd say that would be adequate. You know, there are a lot of things in life that cause us to have negative feelings, cause us unpleasant experiences and feelings, a lot of things in life. This is one thing that you can do for yourself that will always give you a pleasant feeling. And if you go back in your own experiences, I'm sure that you'll remember that you never did a kind thing for anybody that you didn't get a great deal of joy out of. Maybe the other fellow didn't appreciate it. That's unimportant. It's just like love. To have loved alone is a great privilege. And it doesn't make any difference whatsoever whether your love is returned by the other person. You've had the benefit by the emotion of love itself. And so it is by the principle of going the extra mile. It'll do something to you. It'll give you greater courage. It'll enable you to overcome inhibitions and inferiority complexes that you've been storing up back down through the years. Just this stepping out and making yourself useful to somebody. And don't be too surprised when you do something courteous or useful for somebody who's not expecting it, and they look at you with an quizzical sort of way, as much as to say, well, I just wonder why you're doing that. Some people will be a little bit surprised when you go out of your way to be useful to them. Also, it leads to mental growth and physical perfection in various forms of service, thereby developing greater ability and skill in one's chosen vocations. You know, delivering a lecture, or making up your notebook, or filling your job, whatever it is that you do in life that you're going to repeat, make up your mind that every time you do it, you will excel all previous efforts on your part. In other words, you're a constant challenge to yourself. And you'll find how quickly and how rapidly you will grow if you'll go at it in that way. I have never delivered a lecture in my life that I didn't intend to deliver better than I did previously. I don't always do it, but that's my intention. And it makes no difference what kind of an audience I have, whether I have a big class or a small class. I don't often have small classes, but sometimes I have had small classes. But I put just as much into a small class as a big one. Not alone because I want to be useful to my students, but because I want to grow and I want to develop. And out of effort, out of struggle, out of use of your faculties comes growth. And then it enables one to profit by the law of contrast. Had you ever thought about that? And I'll tell you right now, you won't have to advertise that one very much because it'll advertise itself. Because the majority of people around you are not going to be going the extra mile, and that's all to the good for you. Now, if everybody went the extra mile, this would be a grand world to live in, but you couldn't cash in on this principle as definitely as you can now, because you'd have a tremendous amount of competition. But don't worry, you're not going to have it. I can assure you you're not. Practically be in the class by yourself. Now, there'll be some cases perhaps where people with whom you're working or with whom you're associated will be shown up for not going the first mile, let alone the second one, and they won't like it. Now, of course, you're going to cry about that one and quit and go back to your old habits just because the other fellow doesn't like what you're doing, or are you? Of course not. Listen, ladies and gentlemen, it's your individual responsibility in this world to succeed. That's your sole responsibility. And you can't afford to let anybody's ideas or idiosyncrasies or notions get in the way of your success. You can't afford to do that. You should be fair, you should be just with other people, but beyond that, you're under no obligations to let anybody's opinion or idea stop you from going out and being successful. I'd like to see the person that could stop me from being successful. I'd just love to take a look at him, see what he looked like. And I want you to feel that way about it, too. I want you to make up your mind that you're going to put into these laws into operation and that you're not going to let anybody stop you from doing it. Also, it leads to the development of a positive, pleasing mental attitude, which is among the more important traits of a pleasing personality. Not among the more important, it is the most important one. As a matter of fact, it's the first trait of a pleasing personality, as you will see when you get to that lesson. A positive mental attitude. Isn't it a marvelous thing to know what you can do to change the chemistry of your brain so that you're positive instead of negative? Isn't it a wonderful thing to know that you can do that so easily? How? Why, by getting in that frame of mind where you want to do something useful to the other fellow without rendering service with one hand and picking his pocket with the other while you're doing it. Doing it just because of the goodness that you get out of doing it, knowing that eventually, if you render more service and better service than you're paid to render, sooner or later you will be paid for more than you do and paid willingly. That's the way the law works. That's the law of compensation. And that's an eternal law. It never forgets. It has a perfectly marvelous bookkeeping system. And you may be sure that when you're giving out the right kind of service and the right kind of a mental attitude, that you're piling up credits for you somewhere that'll come back to you multiplied sooner or later. Also, it tends to develop a keen, alert imagination because it is a habit which keeps one continuously seeking new and more efficient ways of rendering useful service. Now, that's an important thing, isn't it? It develops your imagination because you begin to look around to see how many places, how many ways and means there are of helping other people to find themselves. And in helping the other fellow to find himself, you find yourself. Incidentally, one of the most outstanding things that I discovered in my research was that when you have a problem or an unpleasant situation and you don't know how to solve it, you've done everything you know, you've tried every source that you know anything about, and you're still at a stalemate, there is always one thing that you can do. And if you'll do that one thing, the chances are that you not only will solve your problem, but you'll learn a great lesson. What is that one thing that you can do? Find somebody who has an equal or a greater problem and start where you stand, then and there, to help that other person. And lo and behold, it unlocks in you something, some cells of the brain. It unlocks some cells that permits infinite intelligence to come into your brain and give you the answer to the solution of your problem. Now, I don't know why that works. But do you know how I know that it does work? Do you know why I can make that statement so positive and not qualified? Do you know how I arrived at that decision? By trying it out hundreds and hundreds of times myself. And by seeing it tried out by hundreds and hundreds of times by my students whom I have recommended to do that same thing. What a simple thing that is. I don't know what it does to you. I don't know why it works. A lot of things in life I don't know. A lot of things you don't know. And then some that you do know that you don't do much about. Now, this is one of them that I don't know anything about, but I do something about. I follow the law because I know that if I need my own mind to be opened up to receive opportunity, the best way in the world to open it up is to start looking around to see how many other people I can help. And also, it develops that important factor of personal initiative. You know, it gets you into the habit of looking around for something useful to do and going out and doing it without somebody telling you to do it. And that's a mighty important thing. You know, that old man procrastination he's a sour old bird, and he causes a lot of trouble in this world. people putting off things until day after tomorrow, which they should have done day before yesterday. And we're all guilty of it, every one of us. I'm not free of it, I know, and I know you're not. But I'm freer of it than I was a few years back, I'll tell you that. I can find a lot of things to do now. Why do I find them? Because I get joy out of doing them. And any time you're going the extra mile, you're going to get joy out of what you're doing. Otherwise, you won't be going the extra mile. And it's going to develop this quality of personal initiative and help you overcome this quality of procrastination. It also serves to build the confidence of others in one's integrity and general ability. And it aids one in mastering the destructive habit of procrastination. It develops definiteness of purpose without which one cannot hope for success. That alone would be enough to justify it. It develops definiteness of purpose. It gives you an objective so that you don't go round and round in circles like a goldfish in a bowl, always coming back to where you started with nothing that you didn't start out with. Definiteness of purpose comes out of this business of going the extra mile. And I'll tell you another thing that it does. That's not in my notes. It enables you to make your work a joy instead of a burden. In other words, you get to where you love it. And I think maybe that if you're not engaged in a labor of love in life, you're wasting a lot of your time. I think one of the greatest joys in the world is one's being permitted to engage in the thing that he would rather do than all other things. And surely when you're going the extra mile, you're doing just exactly that because you don't have to do it. Nobody expects you to do it. Nobody asks you to do it. Certainly no employer would ask his employees to go the extra mile. Oh, he might ask to help out once in a while, but as a regular thing, he wouldn't do that. So it's something that you do on your own initiative, and it gives dignity to labor. It gives dignity, even if you're doing nothing but digging a ditch, and you're doing it because you're helping somebody. You have a certain dignity attached to that takes the fatigue and the unpleasantness out of the labor. What is the most important application you ever made in your life of this business of going the extra mile, out of which you got the greatest amount of joy? Now think hard, please. Tell me.
Being married.
What?
Being married.
Being married? Well, that's getting pretty hot. How about before getting married? Yeah. Believe me, I've spent a lot of time burning midnight oil and later than that. And I didn't consider it hard work at all. Also, it was my own idea. I'd only use my initiative, but I got a lot of joy out of doing it, and I made it pay off. Marvelous thing, how long you can go when you're courting the girl of your choice or being courted by the man of your choice. Marvelous how much sleep you can lose and still not be seriously hurt by it. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if you could put the same attitude into your relations with people professionally or in the business that you put into courtship? Wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? And wouldn't this be a wonderful world to live in? We're going to start back sparking again. It's going to start at home with our own mates. Believe me, I couldn't begin to tell you the number of married couples that I've started in on a new sparking spree. And a lot of joy out of it. Saves a lot of friction, a lot of argument. Cuts down expenses. Go ahead and laugh. Do you good. Now, I don't mean to be facetious about this. I mean, I'm very serious about it when I say that there is one of the finest places in the world to start going the extra mile. When you start going the extra mile with somebody that you haven't been going with, sit down and have a little sales talk with them. Just tell them that you've changed your attitude and you want a mutual agreement for both parties to change the attitude. Now, from here on out, all of us are going the extra mile. We're going to relate ourselves together on a different basis where we'll all get joy out of it and get more peace of mind and more happiness in living. Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing if you went home tonight and had that kind of a speech with your mate? Yes? Wouldn't it be a wonderful thing? It wouldn't hurt. It might help. Now, the mate might not be impressed by it, but you will be. Nothing to hinder you from enjoying it. And that person in business that you haven't been getting along so well with, now, if you went in tomorrow morning with a smile and walked over to him or her and took his hand and shook hands and said, now, listen, pal, from here on out, let you and I enjoy working together. What did you say? Wouldn't work, huh? Oh, yes, it would. Oh, yes, it would. You try it and see. Try it and see. You know, there's a little thing that we have called pride, and if there's one thing that does more damage in this world than any other one, it's that little thing called pride. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to humiliate yourself if it's going to build better human relations with the people that you have to associate with all the time. Thank you. Also, going the extra mile is the only thing which gives one the right to ask for promotions or more pay. Did you ever stop to think about that? You don't have a leg to stand on in going into the purchaser of your services and asking for more money or for a promotion to a better job unless for some time previously you have been going the extra mile, doing more than you're paid for. Because obviously if you're doing no more than you're paid for, then you're being paid for all you're entitled to, aren't you? Certainly you are. So you have to first start going the extra mile and putting the other fellow under obligation to you before you can ask any favors of him. And I'll tell you another thing. If you have enough people whom you have put under obligations to you by going the extra mile, when you need some favor, you can always turn one direction or other and get it. It's a nice thing to know that you have that kind of credits hanging around, isn't it? I want you to have that kind of credits with other people. And I want to teach you the technique by which you can do that. Now, we get our cue as to the soundness of the principle of going the extra mile by observing nature. And here's quite a bit of illustration regarding that. You will see that nature goes the extra mile by producing enough of everything for her needs together with an overplus for emergencies and waste. The blooms on the trees, the fishes in the seas, in the waters. She doesn't just produce enough fish to perpetuate the species. She produces enough to feed the snakes and the alligators and everything else, and those that die of natural causes, and still enough to perpetuate the species. Nature is most bountiful in her business of going the extra mile, and in return, she is very demanding in seeing that every living creature goes the extra mile. Bees are provided with honey as compensation for their services in fertilizing the flowers in which the honey is attractively stored. But they have to perform the service to get the honey, and it must be performed in advance. Nature, you've heard it said that the birds of the air and the beasts of the jungle neither weave nor spin, but they always live and eat. But you know, if you observe wildlife at all, they don't eat without performing some sort of service, without working, without doing something before they can eat. Take a flock of common old cornfield crows, for instance. They have to organize. They have to have sentinels to put down for their protection. They travel in flocks. They have sentinels. They have codes by which to warn one another. They have to do a lot of educating before they can even eat safely. And nature requires man to go the extra mile. He's got to go out, and if he's going to have food, all food comes out of the ground. And if he's going to have food, he's got to plant seed. He can't live entirely on what nature plants. Not in civilized life he can't, at least. Over on the islands where some places where not civilized, I suppose they depend on eating raw coconuts and what have you. But in civilized life, we have to plant our food in the ground. We have to clear the ground first. We have to plow it. We have to harrow it. We have to fence it. We have to protect it against predatory animals and so forth. And all of that costs labor and time and money. And all of that has to be done in advance or you're not going to eat. I wouldn't have any trouble at all selling this idea that nature makes everybody go the extra mile to a farmer. He knows that, beyond any question of a doubt. He knows every minute of his life that if he doesn't go the extra mile, he doesn't eat. He doesn't have anything to sell. A new employee, for instance, going into a new job, can't come right in immediately and start going the extra mile and immediately demand top wages or the best job in the place. You just don't, it doesn't work out that way. You have to establish a record, a reputation. You have to get yourself recognized and received in this business of going the extra mile before you can begin to put pressure on to get compensation back. As a matter of fact, if you go the extra mile in the right sort of mental attitude, the chances are 1,000 to 1 you'll never have to ask for compensation according to the service you rendered, because it'll be tendered you automatically in the way of promotions, in the way of increased salary, And throughout the whole universe, everything has been so arranged through the law of compensation, so adequately described by Emerson, that nature's budget is balanced, so to speak. Everything has its opposite equivalent in something else. Positive and negative in every unit of energy, day and night, hot and cold, success and failure, sweet and sour, happiness and misery, man and woman. Everywhere and everything one may see the law of action and reaction in operation. Everything you do, everything you think, every thought that you release causes a reaction. If not on somebody else, on the person releasing the thought. Because you never, as a matter of fact, when you release a thought, you're not through with it. Every thought that you express, silently even, becomes a definite part of the pattern of your subconscious mind. And if you store in that subconscious mind enough negative thoughts, you'll be predominantly negative. And if you follow the habit of releasing only the positive thoughts, your subconscious pattern will be predominantly positive. And you will attract to you the things, all of the things that you want. And if you're negative, you'll repel the things that you want and attract only the things you don't want. That's a law of nature, too. And this business of going the extra mile is one of the finest ways that I know of educating your subconscious mind to attract to you the things you want and to repel the things you don't want. You can put it down as an established fact that if you neglect to develop and apply this principle of going the extra mile, you will never become personally successful and you will never become financially independent. The reason I happen to know it sound is, you see, I've had a great privilege over you that you haven't had yet, but you will have in time. I had the privilege of observing a great many thousands of people, some of whom applied the principle of going the extra mile and some of whom did not. And I have had the privilege of finding out what happened to those who did and those who didn't. And I know beyond any question of a doubt that nobody ever rises above ordinary or stations in life or mediocrity without the habit of going the extra mile. It just doesn't happen. If I had discovered one case, just one case, where somebody went on to the top without going the extra mile, I would say then there are exceptions. But I am in position to say there are no exceptions because I have never found that one case. And I can definitely tell you from my own experiences, and I have been there every minute of my life, that I have never had a major benefit of any kind in the world, that I didn't get it as a result of going the extra mile. Now that's the thing that I want you to do. I want you to become self-determining so you can do these things without the help of anybody. That's the time when the payoff will come to you, when you can go out and do anything in this world that you want to do, and whether anybody wants you to do it or whether they want to help you or whether they don't, you can do it on your own. I want to tell you that's one of the grandest, most glorious feelings that I know anything about, knowing that as I stand here talking to you, that whatever I wanted to do, I can do it. I don't have to ask anybody, not even my wife. But if I had to ask her, I would, because I'm on good terms with her.